Welcome to Kellie and Scottie podcast number 8. Today we will be discussing the week of action as proposed by trans activist Fae Johnstone. Let the conversation begin. Thank you for calling us all together tonight there, Kellie. We should go around and introduce ourselves. We all have in common is we're all Canadian. I'm Scottie. I'm from Vancouver Island.
Hi, Scottie.
Hi, Scottie.
I'm Kellie Lynn, formerly known as Kenneth. I am a detransitioner. I run Detrans Alliance Canada, and I am gender critical. I believe that there's such a thing as a boy and a girl.
I am Emily Duggan. I'm the founder of Mums Against the Norm. I'm from the West Kootenays, and I am just a mom.
Amanda, you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm from the little town of Falkland in the South Shuswap. And I'm just eager to be able to contribute to that greater good.
Karin?
Yeah, I'm Karin. I am gender critical. I have come to this through both educational analysis and just basically personal experience, I suppose. And because I sort of saw it coming through the education system as I was concerned about reading and arithmetic and all those other important things
Yes,
that have
Amanda?
into the background. And I'm in Vancouver, and I've run for public office a couple of times on this platform, as has Emily, of course, more recently. Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
And that's me.
Just some housekeeping. Let's try and perhaps we try raising our hand with this many people because I hear some sound interference. I'm going to mute my microphone right now. And let's take it over to Arty.
Hello, my name is Arty Morty. I am in Toronto. I am in Canada, and I'm critical of gender identity ideology. I'm a gay man who has seen firsthand the madness creeping into the gay community where I used to work. And that's me. Great to meet you all.
I'm Jessica. I'm from out in Durham region, which is just outside of Toronto on the east side. I'm a bisexual mother of two beautiful daughters, one of whom had teachers try to transition her behind my back because they heard that she was bisexual and liked girls. So that's how I got involved in all this. Oh, Kellie, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Melanie, have you introduced yourself yet?
Hello, I'm I'm Melanie. How do I introduce myself? I also have personal experience in this, and I also came at it from the educational perspective. I don't know, what do I do? I think I've carved a little bit of a niche at the minute, looking into the ideological presentation of queer theory in the Canadian context, and I try to share that creatively in ways that hopefully the average Canadian can pick up on. But I'm in Toronto, I guess, if that makes a difference.
That's still part of Canada, so
Yeah.
you're welcome. So Fae Johnstone recently put out a press release announcing the Rainbow Week, and very much speaking out against the actions of New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and the steps that they're taking to preserve childhood for children, so that kids are not going to be asked in those provinces to be making the types of decisions that will impact their adult choices. And Faye is very much against this. So I just thought it would be good for individuals who understand the importance of allowing kids to be kids and boys to be boys, to openly talk about what we thought about the press release. Did anyone want to kick us off?
Yeah, I just watched that thing. I'll kick us off. Um, it says there's a lot of words that say very little. Um, it's all I can say about that. I mean, there's a lot of Darvo. There was one activist, I think Tyler was his name, from Enchanté, was talking about how people are afraid to go to work. I'm like, I'm afraid to go to work. This big union guy was on there going on about equal rights and people feeling safe. I'm like, I don't feel safe at work because of my union. It was wild. It was a lot of hyperbole, framing concern as hate. Like we all know how they frame that. That was my hot take. It said very little with a lot of words. Anyone else want to talk on that before we view it?
Arty, go ahead.
Excuse me. I just want to make the point that I'm about to sneeze at the same time, so excuse me. In mid sneeze, I'm speaking. It's getting there. Okay, sorry. What Fae Johnstone, if we're going to talk about what he has to say, it would be a good idea to make sure we make it very clear exactly what it is, the argument that he's making, so that critics don't accuse us of of what do you call it again when you're going after something that's not true? Anyway, I think you know my point. Is that let's make sure that we're very clear about what exactly it is that his argument that he's trying to make. And it's never easy with these people because often their arguments are so bizarre and irrational and illogical, it's hard to even try. You have to do the work of articulating what they're trying to say just to get to the point that you have something that you can argue against. You know, it's like they're throwing a big puddle of soup at you, and you have to turn the soup into a person just so you can combat what they have to say. I'm actually not entirely clear what it is that Fae Johnston's point was, other than I have long hair and a nose ring, please give me money, seemed to literally be the gist of it. But I hope that we could try to find some substance beyond just I have a nose ring and long hair, please give me money, so that we actually have some substance to criticize. But it may well literally just be that stupid. Yeah.
I'd
Well,
like
very
to
much.
make a comment if I could.
Go ahead.
So I'm not at home quite yet, so I don't have the video on. But I just wanted to highlight before going into the video, I think a big part of what Faye is trying to do is really foment fear within the gay population, which, has been very effective, as well as the general belief in the population that the community is really a threat. And I think there's a heavy emphasis on that, as well as the exploitation of people's empathetic response to that. And I think that's heavy in the language throughout, and I just wanted to highlight that going in.
Yeah, very much. Sorry, Jess, you just moved on my screen. You can
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, to add to that, Amanda, I think you're absolutely right on that. It's no different than it was a selling speech. Like it really was. It was them selling the fear. It's no different than when we have the unions and that going to our school boards with the trans affirming toolkit. They sell it to them out of fear. If you don't do this, you will kill children. If and unfortunately, fear sells.
Yeah, I found it very interesting that in this, Faye did not talk about the cast report at all. And yet, in some of the preliminary stuff he was putting out a week ago, he was talking about the protests he would be organizing in May, and that it would be about the cast report as well. But in the press release, there was like crickets regarding cast. Emily, did you want to?
Yeah, I actually it was very hard for me to watch that 12-minute video. And I come at it from a mother's perspective, and I was really interested, I guess you could say, in what that purple hair, blue haired mom had to say. And I'm always very amazed that they always have purple or blue hair, but I digress. She's so worried about her child's safety, but what about the rest of our kids' safety? What about our kids' safety from social contagion? She didn't seem to mention anything about anybody else. And I've noticed that in this movement, there's a lot of me, and not very much of the rest of us. So that's what I noticed when I watched that video, is a lot of um, cater to me and my lifestyle, and the rest of you just sit down and shut up. It's our turn. That's what I took from that video.
Scottie, go ahead. Unmute.
When she was talking, I was chuckling to myself because it's just male on male violence you're talking about. I'm like, that's not new news, essentially, because that's what she was meaning and intending for this violence against trans women, which is gay men have experienced violence for being effeminate. Like, but the way they were talking about it, it's like, name one person, name one trans woman who was killed in Canada. Like, and she used words like epidemic. I'm like, where? Where? Oh, that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, they're very much tied into a narrative where they're putting out keywords, but the keywords don't necessarily mean anything. It's like I get accused of hate so much on social media that the end of a conversation yesterday, I was like, you know what? I love you. I love you unconditionally. And I'm going to say to you that your behavior has been unacceptable. So no, no is love. It's like, because what is this? The hate that they talk about all the time. The transphobia. Yes, CSIS, under the direction of the federal government, has opened a file on gender critical people in Canada. I think we're all aware of that now, right? But the RCMP, when they had Central Intelligence, opened a file under the instruction of the federal government on the NDP when the NDP was forming as a party. And that's why CSIS came into being, because it was such a scandal that the way the federal government dealt with it was they created CSIS. So we know that Central Intelligence in Canada is compromised at the federal level, but what is hate? You know, like all of these things they're describing, because they're like, hate this, hate that, hate this. There's all of this hate that this protest is to counter. But they don't describe actual incidents of violence. Like when I was a teenager, 16, 17 years old, I was constantly getting called a dyke or a lesbian or, whatever, because I was different. I was gender nonconforming, and I was more interested in beating up boys than dating them. So, it's like, compared to what was going on in schools in the 1980s, what they're describing as hate now is telling a boy that he can't run on the women's track team, telling him he can't be on the girls volleyball team, telling him, so any instance of no, as far as I can tell, is what they're now labeling as hate. Does anyone want to?
They're totally crying wolf, as far as I can see, on this front of hate cries. It's completely false narrative almost every single time. And it's exhausting, because anytime you open your mouth to say something, boom, you're being hateful and you're labeled, which is insane, because I can say something, choose my words wisely, and then be labeled this, that, and the other thing. And it's actually them who is slinging the hate, the name calling, the bashing, the character bashing. Like, I just ran for school board trustee in a by-election, and two people that I know had their employment threatened because of being friends with me.
Wow.
So where's the hate? Because it wasn't coming from me. I described my opponent, the person who won, is a trans man. I described this person as a trans man, which equals a biological woman living life as a man.
Mhm.
And this person insists on being called a father because they're a parent to 3 children, I believe. And I was labeled hateful for saying that. Well, the moment that this person won, they're chanting from the rooftops, "Yay, the second transgendered school board trustee in British Columbia." And they're describing this person the exact same way I was, but when I did it, it was hateful.
Yeah.
So it's the pot calling the kettle black. It's it's narcissism at work.
Yeah.
Arty, I saw you
Karin?
had. Sorry, Arty's been flapping his hand up for
Okay.
a while. Can we go Arty and then Karin?
Okay.
Well,
All
what's
right.
really interesting is that, I have this idea that I'm being listened to at all times now by CSIS. And there's almost this idea that anyone who tries to listen to us would just be so floored by how normal and rational and reasonable we are. They would immediately turn to their bosses and say, "Oh, you guys, there's nothing here. These people aren't terrorists. Give me a break." But unfortunately, we know from history that that's not how it works. If you look at East Germany, when people did start conducting intelligence against perfectly sensible, friendly, reasonable people who were aghast at the irrationality of the world that they were in, but they themselves were perfectly friendly and rational, the people who were tasked with espionage against them were not receptive to their reasonableness because they were motivated not to. So, to my imaginary shadow who is spying on every word I'm saying, they cannot comprehend that what we are saying today and right now is totally rational and reasonable because they're motivated to tell their bosses how evil we are so they can filter out everything nice we say and seek out the ways that we are wrong and bad. And this is really scary. We have to understand that it's our enemy, our opponents are a lot less rational than we can possibly fathom. And it's not enough to just show up and be really friendly and say, look how unreasonable you're being and how nice we're trying to be. That's actually not enough. We have to do more. And I don't even know exactly what we have to do, but the matter of fact is that it's not working. We are standing in front of everyone saying, look how nice we're being, look how reasonable we're being, and you're not listening. We have to acknowledge that there's some kind of like psychological strategy we have to build to get around this. And the answer is somewhere in the realm of cult deprogramming and of deep strategy. But I don't know. I don't have an easy answer for you. I don't know. But it's really scary because there's nothing we can do. It's really, really scary. Yeah.
Before
Yeah.
we go to Karin, Melanie, would you like to respond to Arty?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I think the question there is, who are you trying to convince, right? What are you trying to do? Because if the question is that you're trying to change the minds of people who are in the cult, then potentially that's the wrong goal. You may never achieve that. Now, if you're trying to reach people on the periphery who believe it, but who are maybe not true believers, the point may not be to try to convince them or to try to deprogram them. The point may be to change the zeitgeist, to change the cultural environment. But to do that, you're not going to convince them. What you have to do is you have to you have to go sideways, right? So you have to build the momentum in other ways. This is just how I interpret it, how I look at it, talking to people. So I think I think if the idea is to try to convince or deprogram those who are already in it, I'm not sure that's going to be a very effective way. And so it might be a better strategy to, like in we still have to deal with these kinds of protests. We still have to deal with the fact that they get a lot of money. But if we can change the political environment, for example, like look, I'm not saying I'm you know, for the whole Polyev thing, a conservative thing. But for example, if the country changes the political environment, we're able to influence enough people who have say over what funding goes where, and you cut that off. You know, if we manage to in enough places remove or limit the access to so-called gender affirming care, you know, like all of these sort of elements that can change the environment, that cut off the funding, cut off the access to this care, and try to open the conversation. I think in that sideways there might be more of an impact in the long term, but it's not. I'm just not convinced that you're going, well, one, you're never going to convince the true believers. That's always going to be a thing. And two, a lot of the people following along with this will change their mind, but when everyone else has changed their mind.
Right.
Anyway, that's my interpretation. It's like, well, what are you trying to achieve?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent question. Karin, and then we'll be going to Amanda. She's had her hand up for a while.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to jump the line there. I didn't put up my technological hand.
I
I was one of the interesting things about this little staged event was that we're not even clear that it was a so-called press release. I mean, it was pointed out by Duchess Lois on X or Twitter that there's no evidence that there was actually any media there. You know, they may have had a few people sitting in the audience just to give them somebody to talk to, but it's entirely likely that it was just staged for the purpose of making a video. And the fact that there were no questions asked at the end sort of confirms, suggests that might be true. Which is where we really see that this is not a debate that, from their point of view, people talked earlier about the fact that they're selling this program on a fear basis. They are paid. They're paid to hold a certain point of view, and we've seen this in paid activism in every field that, you know, certainly that I've been involved in. I mean, it's certainly the climate thing right now, or I mean, back when I was arguing about smoking in public places and sort of the clean air movement, secondhand smoke, all that stuff. You would have people who were paid to hold a certain point of view, and when you're volunteers, you think that you're dealing with somebody who can change their minds if you come up with the right argument. But when they are paid, they cannot change their mind, whether they want to or not. They are going to stand there, and you know, the sum of 1.3 million has been thrown around in connection with Fae Johnstone, which I don't know. You know, I assume that's sort of a cumulative total, but when you're talking that kind of money, that kind of an income, you'll sell. You know, you're gonna push your narrative, and it doesn't matter how sincere the people are that you're arguing with, or how right they are, how persuasive they are. You're gonna stick to your guns, and so our strategy really does need to go around those people who are paid. Engaging with them is not, it's not fruitful. It can go nowhere.
Yeah, that's what one person was suggesting in the PRCOC chat, was saying that we don't do counter protests, we don't do anything during this. We create our posters, we put out our position, and we email or snail mail our MPs and our MLAs, and we speak directly with the politicians saying that we disagree with what's being done here. Amanda was next.
Regardless of how insane the arguments are, nonetheless, the strategies have been brilliant and really effective. And I think that that is really important to acknowledge. One of the things I think is going on here, people throw around the word narcissistic, and if it was a singular person, this movement would definitely be described as narcissistic. And I think that probably, I'm assuming for all of us here, we're not used to operating in the way that a narcissist would. And some of those features are being very manipulative, being parasitic, and gaslighting. Those are strategies I never think to use when I'm interacting in the world. And yet they can be very, very effective strategies. And it's proved out to be that you can sell an insane idea using those techniques. Especially with that. When this initially was really coming along, I was happy to see that I live in a country, the country of Canada, that largely people are so empathetic that the initial general response of the public was that, here's some, kids that's similar to gay, and, we want to support them. I felt like, hey, it's so misguided because the general public's being so misinformed. But it really reflects the general empathy of Canadian citizens that they have been so supportive, and that empathy has been hijacked. I think what we need to do is really emphasize that alternative gay narrative, that this is gay conversion therapy. That's been heavily focused upon in the UK, and that seems to have gained a lot of traction, particularly by gay politicians there. There's components of that narcissistic mindset that is, black and white thinking, no debate, using language like this kills children. Not to say that we should be taking that same angle, but looking at the language that they're using, and it's like, you're saying that is killing children. And we know that's not true. How do we get the general public to know that if it's not being reported on? But pushing that narrative that this is gay conversion, these are young gay kids that are being harmed. And I think that the general population of the gay community across the country doesn't understand that. And I think that that is something that really needs to be emphasized. And I think that the way that's emphasized is through detransitioners, because so many of them are gay. And, being able to continue to elevate detransitioners. I have a friend I just talked to recently. She's a teacher in the education system here in BC in elementary school. She didn't even know there was such thing as detransitioners. And she's a lefty, active, well-informed person, but she's relying generally on mainstream media for her information. And I know that Erin had said with the LGBT Courage Alliance, that's one of the things they're really wanting to emphasize is getting media training and getting onto media to be able to push forward that narrative. But that's an area that I'm wanting to look at how I can promote that education within the gay community around me.
Yeah, thank you. To your opening comment, like one of the things I've done to counter the just be kind narrative is I talk about how, like, I live with a history of childhood sexual exploitation. When I started reaching about 8 years old, that's when, as a child, my witness in criminal court would have been considered to have weight. So the pedophiles in my life very much started telling me how cruel prison is, and how so when I'm pushed into that just be kind corner, that's the narrative I put out. Is like, no, there's some times where the right thing to do is going to be experienced by the person who is hearing no as not kind. But there's a time where speaking the truth is not going to be well received. But it's important to go ahead and continue with that truth. Jess, you're next. And then Arty is after you.
Okay, I'll put my hand down. Yeah, you're mentioning about Karin, I believe earlier you were talking about like how there's so many different issues and paid actors and things like that. Or was it Amanda? I apologize. But I know it was mentioned. And
Jess, can I
one
just say you're not coming through very loudly? Do you mind? Are you able to get closer to the mic?
oh, it's I got a new set of headphones. Is that
Oh,
better?
beautiful. Yeah, that's
Okay.
way better.
Thank you.
Sorry. So I've like after there was that leaked union meeting on September 15th, I've been watching a lot of what our unions do.
Okay.
And it's been quite evident that they've basically formed a monopoly.
Yeah.
And a lot of these issues that come up that you guys were talking about a little bit ago, if you notice, there's all one link, and it's all these unions. It's the same unions. They joined forces not that long ago. It's why a lot of things are very well coordinated. And the scary thing is like you see them last weekend on the streets of Toronto, like putting out speeches for communism and whatever else. And because these same unions are our government workers, they are our government systems. I believe they're the ones that are not being nonpartisan, like they're legally obligated to be. And that is why the message is always coming across the way that it does. It's almost always 9 times out of 10, if you watch what's coming out of our government, it's reflective of what the unions are pushing for, especially over the last, I'm going to say over the last year and a half, there's been a major shift in that.
How did the unions get to this place? Like in 80, would have got the job in 88, 87. Like I was incredibly closeted at that time. I was same-sex attracted and just starting a relationship with a woman. And I made sure no one at my HEU job in BC, I was working in Burnaby, had any idea that I was living with another woman. Like, how did, like, I missed that whole shift in thinking. Anyhow, Arty, you were next, and then Amanda. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, just an executive change, but yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, first of all, that this conversation is blowing my mind in just the sheer amount, the caliber of thinking that's going on. Sometimes I get so resentful of being in Canada because I feel so isolated that there aren't enough critical thinkers addressing this issue. And here I am in a room full of people who are just nuclear bombs of critical thinking on this issue. It's amazing. And I want to address specifically what Amanda just said about narcissism. That is such a powerful appeal to fight narcissism. Let's put ourselves in the minds of people who are endorsing gender identity ideology. They're trying to say that there's something about anti-gay bias that they recognize and they want to signal to their peers that they oppose it. And there's something about this whole thing, it's a kind of flattery, right? It's saying there's this clever idea that stupid people aren't good enough to understand, but you will understand it, right? And that's very appealing. This sort of appeal to people's minds, appeal to people's vanity, or appeal to people's fear of not fitting in. Narcissism has a fantastic quality in that we all have experienced a narcissist in our lives. In our workplaces, somebody who hopscotched over us by being just an absolute piece of shit, or somebody who we dated for a while who absolutely drained us of our life force for their own purposes and then left us high and dry. Narcissism has a wonderful quality of when you throw that word out, you're asking people to use the same tools that trans activists are using to say, don't you recognize this? Smart people can see this and other people can't. Don't you want to be one of us who can detect narcissism as a quality in people? I propose that that's a powerful tool. Let's start emphasizing the narcissism of trans activists. We are just like you all. We totally oppose bigotry and regressive values when it comes to freedom of expression, freedom to dress, freedom to have sex with who you choose, you know, all the fundamentals of gay rights. We are all on board with all of that, just like you are. But there's a quality of narcissism in some people. Why aren't you seeing it like we are? This has that flavor of appeal to it, I propose. So I think there's a cleverness in the narcissism angle because I think it has the capacity to reach the very people who are refusing to reach us with every single other appeal. So I'm blown away by your suggestion, Amanda, that there's so much narcissism in this because who doesn't want to say? Who wants to say no? I can't see that person's a narcissist. Everybody wants to say no. I get it. You know, there's something there. That's my idea.
Yeah, because they're demanding that women they're attracted to have to date them. They're demanding that men they're attracted to have to date them. There is this idea that I will freely accept what is freely offered is like beyond their narrative, and that really speaks to the narcissistic quality of where they're coming from. They're speaking from a place of complete entitlement. Amanda, you are next.
Just one more comment on the narcissism. I did come across a study that I just briefly glanced through that did note a high level of narcissistic personality disorder along with AGP. But that being said, I haven't fully fleshed that out because, of course, we just can't rely on research right now without, substantiating the quality of it. But I did want to say, in response to something that you had said, Kellie, how did this get in? How did this get into the unions? And because I think that's an angle that it's really important to also use as a strategy is to demand neutrality of our government, our institutions, our education system at all levels, and our unions as well. And I think that the reason why this has gotten as far as it has is because of the nature of critical social justice in itself.
Yeah.
And within critical race, it makes it much more overt that you can be racist or anti-racist. There's no opportunity for neutrality. And we have trusted and expected our institutions to be absolutely neutral, definitely to enforce the law. So, any sort of protections around discrimination, they automatically are obligated to adhere to because that's the law. But within critical social justice, not allowing that neutrality, it actually forces everybody into that you are for this or you are against this position, and that the only moral choice is the support of this belief system, the support of, again, whatever avenue of critical social justice that we're talking about. That's one of the things I'm wanting to do in my town. We have like 1,000 people. It's a very small town, but I do plan to bring it to our local community association, a commitment to neutrality. It's a little redneck town. I don't think we're going to have a problem passing that. But there was the community, I forget, I want to say Waterton, but that's Ontario, in northern Alberta that had done that they had demanded neutrality, that any sort of, no pride flags anywhere. And they weren't specifically in opposition to pride. They were, clear-headed people seeing that it's problem for our institutions, our police force, our healthcare, or anything to take any sort of social justice stance. They have to remain neutral, and we need to demand that. And so I think that's one of the actions that we can take locally is demanding of our municipalities and, as a place to start to take on that neutrality. And if we can get momentum behind that, I think a lot of people were like, we had separation of church and state for a reason. And it's like this has kind of gotten in the back door around that separation because it's not recognized as religion. But it's effectively the same problem before we had separation of church and state. So I think that's an avenue where we can get a lot of people on board. Plus, everybody's so freaking sick of all the flags everywhere being shoved down their throats through all of their media everywhere. It's just too much. So I think that's an avenue, just like people's fatigue around that is an avenue to push for in municipalities neutrality. And then from that, school boards, and what other institutions we have access to.
Yeah, Woodstock's press release on that was really good because they specifically went into the fact that they were wanting to put up the progressive flag. So they specifically addressed the fact that this flag has become very divisive amongst the LGB and separated out to the TQ community. So there is no unity within the community that this flag was supposed to be representing. Therefore, because of its divisive nature, they said no. Emily, you were next, and then Karin, and then Jess. So Emily, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, Amanda's on fire. What she was talking about at the neutrality that is exactly what we need. And how we can get there is the big question, because I was told by an RCMP officer that me and my dumb movement are not welcome in his town. And so when you have personalities like that in positions of power like that, how can we create neutrality in our communities, in these institutions, when we have activists in these job positions acting out their ideas on what is right and what is wrong? So this is the golden question, right? Like, how do we get there? And I think that you're onto something. Like, you're in Falkland. Uh-oh, I lost you guys. You're in Falkland. I'm quite familiar with Falkland. I grew up in Armstrong, and my folks are in Falkland, actually. Yeah. So I think that that's like a really great way for us to start with the small communities, lead by example. If we can get these small communities that have really great folks in them, farming folks, rural folks, community-minded folks, and we can get them to lead by example for the larger communities, I think maybe that might be a great way to put our best foot forward here, because yeah, I can tell you that when an RCMP member says that to you, it makes you step back and reevaluate for a second. I mean, I haven't been back to that town since, actually, because it's a little nerve-wracking. They can do whatever they want and get away with it, RCMP members. So I really I got to watch my back, my front, both sides, up, down, see what's going on, because I've got a target on my back now. And I'd be lying if I said it wasn't intimidating or scary. But so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. But also, I had originally raised my hand because I was thinking about something Karin said, but Amanda just blew me away. We got to give her the floor more often. She's good at this. But Karin had said something previously that I thought was interesting, when talking about Fae's show that was put on, and how we don't even actually know if it was a press release. No questions were asked or anything. So how have they managed to organize this week that they've just announced? And how does this keep happening? Like, first it's a pride parade, you get a pride day, which is fine. The way that all came about and started was totally and completely all right. But now it's like it goes from a week to a month. Well, now we've got a season. A pride season. It's totally and completely blown out of proportion. My child's elementary school, my kid's in grade 3, in September or in August, we weren't even in school yet. We get an email from the principal inviting us to the pride parade. Why is this something that's coming from an elementary school principal in the middle of summer? How do they keep getting away with this? I don't understand. The organization and the push power that they have is mind-blowing. And so I guess I'm just talking in circles here. I don't know. I'm trying to work it out, but I'm not coming up with the magic answer. But I do think that Amanda's onto something here with starting in small rural communities, with really like putting forward this neutrality, because it's scary having our media is done. It's nothing. It's all one-sided. It's not journalism anymore. They're not reporting unbiasedly. There's nothing neutral. It's all opinion. And our government is the same. Our RCMP, all of these institutions are captured. How do we get back? It's kind of like an open-ended question there, but that's what I've got.
Taking back communities one step at a time. I believe Karin is next, then Melanie, then Amanda. I think I'm in the right part of the circle. The pictures keep changing, so just when I have it lined up, they switch on me. Mute.
Unmute, Karin.
Karin, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I also, by the time I speak, I've had my hand up and 2 more people have spoken and said 7 more things that I want to respond to. So,
excellent.
So I'm going to just try to make sense here. So neutrality is a really interesting, is a laudable goal. The interesting thing about neutrality, I think this is kind of how the extremists have pushed all the institutions away from neutrality, is because when you have neutrality here, your regular standards of practice, and then you have your extremists, the organizations are always trying to make peace with the extremists, so they meet somewhere here, but that's already way off neutral. It's like when you're pitting neutral against extreme, you can only end up in the extremists' territory somewhere, and then it keeps going further to them. And it's why, you know, you actually may have to take an adversarial position in order to end up as neutral. It's at neutral, but certainly fighting for legitimate standards of practice in many fields is worth doing. And I wanted to talk about how so one of the things that that I observed at one point was that it seemed as though it almost seemed that when kids fall into this mindset, they develop what I started calling a learned narcissism, because the narcissism is somehow, it's built into the ideology, and it's built in really even in the sort of I'm not going to say gay ideology because that's not what it is, but in the instruction about LGB, even it's built in by, and it's in such subtle ways. It's by saying things like, who do you think you're attracted to? And so the kids start thinking, well, who am I attracted to? Well, your relationship does not depend on who you're attracted to. It depends equally on who's attracted to you. And so that even just turning their little brains into just thinking about attraction as sort of from their perspective, it starts to develop this me mentality. And so so not only do they actually reduce their chances of having a good romantic relationship, but they can't have relationships with anybody in their family anymore, even because they've got this me centrism, narcissism, whatever you want to call it. And so to me, looking at the language and looking at the phraseology and the strategies, not just about their marketing, but really how they're reaching people and how they're affecting people's minds, I think is really important. And once you have this learned narcissism, it's really easy to convince somebody that if they're not being celebrated in the moment, then they are being hated. So, you know, just sitting in a classroom and being taught math, well, that's hatred, right? Because you're not actively being centered and celebrated. And the thing about the hate, and we got on this earlier and we sort of got away from it, but I want to go back to this issue that if you look at all these organizations, if you look at Egal Canada's website, who else was what was I looking at? all of the sort of call it the rainbow organizations, they are all positioning themselves first and foremost as defenders against hate, as defenders of the. It's starting to. It's so repetitive when you go across several of them in a row. You start. It really hits you like a brick. And what I think it is about this narrative, this hate narrative, is that it puts anybody reasonable, anybody neutral into a lose-lose situation. So that means that if we're accused of being hateful, well, then anything you do that is a little bit agitated or aggressive or even assertive, all of a sudden you can be accused of being hateful. And if you get so frustrated, or rather, sorry, if they do something hateful and hurt you, well, then they're justified because you were being hateful. It's like you. It puts us in a place where we can't win in a sort of judgment situation. So it really is. It's very much around this hate narrative right now. That's where things are going. It's always so hard to see where things are going and get there when you need to, rather than sort of chasing what they appear to be doing. And I just wanted to say one more thing about creating neutrality or pushing neutrality, is that we tend to be, as reasonable people, we tend to let things slide and kind of like, so your RCMP encounter, Emily, we tend to just sort of go, oh my God, that was really worrisome. But then we don't necessarily follow up. And the reality is that every time there's an institution that is not neutral, there is grounds for complaint, and there are always complaint mechanisms. And anybody can make that complaint. So one of the things that in your position I might be a little uncomfortable about, Emily, would be making the complaint about an officer. But everybody in the community has a stake in that complaint, and anybody can make it. So that's where the value would be of publicizing that story. And then somebody in the community should be saying, wait a minute, this is not the kind of policing that we should be getting. And so hundreds of people could make that complaint. It doesn't have to come from you. But we are really prone to just kind of letting things pass and thinking, okay, we're gonna fix it some other way. Or this is one of the things we have to fix, and we don't react to every single one of those instances. And I think if we had much more consistent, I mean, Canadians are just, we're really accustomed to peace, order, and good government, and it being somebody else's job to provide us with those things. And citizenship is not a job to Canadians, and it should be. Yeah. We really should all understand that if it happens in our wheelhouse, it is our job to fix it somehow or another, even if it is just going through a bureaucratic mechanism. So human rights complaints, which have been weaponized to drag this thing so far off of neutral, how many human rights complaints in return have been made? Not very many. I mean, there was the one against Jonathan Yanev, but we don't make them in return. And I think I probably personally have grounds for 3 or 4 that I haven't made. I comfort myself that I have done some other things, but everybody's got these experiences, the system complaints, the human rights complaints, and even the lawsuits should absolutely be flying. Yeah. Sorry, that was...
No, you reminded me about, it was popular when I was involved in trans advocacy. It was called Nonviolent Communication, was the name of the book. The book was written by a man who worked for an insurance company. And he developed this way of approaching people who had a large insurance claim and getting them on average to settle out of court for 10% or less of what they would have gotten had they gone to court. because of how the communication style was framed, non-violent communication, people thought it was amazing and wonderful and empowering, when in fact what it was the person in position of power getting the person without the power to behave the way they wanted them to behave. Like, I feel when you, that comes out of nonviolent communication skills. Melanie, I think you're next, then Amanda, then Arty, then Scottie.
I had a really long day and I'm going to do my best. I wanted to touch on two things. First, hate, and it's funny you talked about nonviolent communication. So part of what I've been doing over the past few years is really try to understand the mindset behind a lot of what's going on. And my understanding of hate is, and after reading a lot of literature, so this is going to be based on what I'm hearing from a lot of these academic activists and the activists themselves. So hate, my understanding of that is going to be a different, so something that undoes the current framework or way of thinking from the opposite ideology. Well, in the Trans Affirming Toolkit, which is a toolkit, trans toolkit in Ontario, that's being pushed right now, the funding for that says specifically they receive funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council to fight hate. Now, the toolkit doesn't talk about hate. It does talk about white supremacy, and it does do the intersectional thing, but it doesn't specify what this far right is, right? It's fighting the far right. And when you look into the literature, they specifically published, the authors of this toolkit specifically published an article that describes very clearly that the point of their praxis is to is to criticize individualism and liberalism as discriminatory, inherently discriminatory, because what that means is that you have to accommodate a child who is announcing themselves as trans or queer or whatever, and by waiting for that child to announce themselves, you are assuming that the entire classroom and everyone is cis, and by doing that, you are invoking cisgenderism. And because cisgenderism is oppressive group, right? It oppresses trans and queer identities. You cannot do that. And so the hate would be to do things like the ideas of accommodating individuals, right? Now that's going to apply in other intersectional theories, but in queer, it's very, very evident that hate is individualism, liberalism. This is what people don't understand. And so because of the way that they think, it is a collectivist ideology. So all of these intersectional critical race theory, decolonialism, queer theory, all of these things are collectivist identities. And so anybody who presents individualist ideas, and it doesn't matter how gently you provide your opinion, the mere fact that you are expressing individualism, you are coming from a position of a liberal, and I'm not talking liberal here, I'm just talking about liberalism, individualism, right? The concept that we all have our own right to our opinion. You are not behaving in a collectivist way. This is the queer collective, LGBTQ community, right? And so you have to stand together in solidarity. And when you are stepping out of the position of solidarity, you are expressing an opinion that is hateful towards the collective. That's what hate is. And unfortunately, that's kind of what's taken over the unions. That's what's taken over essentially our institutions, right? Whether or not all of the people doing this are true believers. So that's my understanding of hate. That's what hate means. And so I don't think it really matters how nicely you put it. I don't think you could be aggressive or not aggressive in any way. The mere fact that you're expressing your individual opinion that is in opposition to the collective is hate. And so the other thing I wanted to, I think it was Emily, you asked, where did this come from? Where did this week come from? And I don't know if that was a literal question, but I can tell you. So I spend a lot of my time listening to, or searching for, analyzing and listening to queer theorists speaking, queer activists in their meetings, reading the literature. And Fae Johnstone gave a presentation, I think it was like a month and a half or 2 months ago. And I can't remember the name of the org, but I posted on my thread about it on my Twitter, where he was describing how effective the Million Marches were. Yes. And how the language of parental rights was not helping them, or the attack on parental rights, which is a principle of queer theory, but I won't go into that right now. And this was not effective, and that they needed to soften their stance and bring people in, like people who are the PPC. They're not your enemy anymore. We need to bring them in because this is not working in our favor. We, the Million Marches were really effective, and so we need to find a way to counter that. We don't want this rising tide of hate of all these parents coming together and standing against us, right? And so from that talk, then I noticed that these march, or whatever this they're doing, the rallies and all this, sounded suspiciously familiar to the Million Marches. And then in the press release of the CBC, or at least in the interview, the CBC very clearly started talking about the position of parents and how parents were being attacked and all this stuff. And it became very, very clear to me that this week that's going on, which is across the country, all the different cities, all coordinated, is a copy of the Million Marches, almost identical. Now, the difference is that Queer Momentum received, I don't know, 1.5 million or something like that recently. They've received quite a lot of money with the new budget. And that's where it came from. And you've noticed all of the unions who, right before the Million Marches last year, there was a leaked video of many union members who called parents bigots, Nazis, were organizing against us. And these are the very same unions that are joining in on this particular week. And so the links there are very clear. Like, it's very obvious exactly where this came from and what they're doing. And my opinion is we need to cut off their funding. Now, Jessica in this chat is doing a lot of work on unions, trying to hold them to account and try to show that they're stepping beyond. And on top of that, and she's doing a really, really good job of it, trying to show that they're going beyond their mandates. But we know that that's not enough, because they're inventing new rules as they go along. Mm-hmm. But the National Post, interestingly enough, I don't know if any of us had anything to do with it, but the National Post put out a really interesting article also starting to talk about how the unions are going beyond their mandates. And so there seems to be an appetite to be showing that they're no longer simply organizations that are advocating for the, I guess, improvements in working quality for their workers, that they're no longer listening to the workers. The workers are not voting on some of this social justice activists, and they're using their base to push forward radical socialist agendas. So this is getting national. It's the National Post. Obviously, it's not the CBC, but it's certainly getting some attention. And so I think that's actually, the unions are actually really, really putting some attention on the unions, and effort in shining light on that would be really, really effective. Because if you can cut their ability to have that power, and you can cut the funding sources to organizations like Queer Momentum, I think that would have a massive impact on getting rid of a lot of this. Anyway, those are my 2 cents.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, was it you who put out the meme about the right now starting at private property ownership, and that's how everybody else in Canada found themselves at the far right? Because if liberal is now the beginning of right wing, those who used to call themselves conservatives are by definition at the extreme end of that. Amanda, then I believe Arty, Scottie, and Jess will be next. So wow, Jess, you're number 4.
We're talking so many things here. So many things I'd like to respond to. I really feel that ultimately in civilization, every conflict ultimately comes down to that conflict between the individual and the collective. And I think it's so ironic. I mean, this flavor of collectivism is very Western, very North American, very American collectivism, because I think it so much of what's going on is actually from the hyper individualism that we have. I think it's so ironic what Melanie pointed out, that in the classroom, that one child that every other child has to conform to, the change, the compelled speech and the denial of reality and all of these things for the benefit of that one individual child. That's certainly not how Soviet Russia worked at all. It's a very American view of collectivism, that the emphasis is on that individual's rights to supersede the right of the collective within that room in that particular circumstance. And I think a part of that really comes from that component of hyper individualism in our country, and this excessive focus on the feelings of children, that we're raising children now with a hyper emphasis on their feelings and their feelings in the moment. We're not building them to be resilient. We're just catering to their feelings and their feelings in the moment. It's like a progression that's been happening like since the 70s. We've moved more and more toward that. And of course, we need to be able to trust our feelings, but we're a whole person. We're not just that. We need to have personal responsibility. That means some level of self-sacrifice for a greater good, rather than just your emotional reaction and what makes you happy in the moment. And I think that, I'm a student of Buddhism, and so I had a real aversion to identity politics in the first place, because within the Buddhist idea, these attachments that we have to identity, or who we think we are in ourselves, is a source of suffering in our own creation, in our own mind. And the more we move away from those attachments, the more accepting we are of the true nature of reality. And so I had a natural aversion to the emphasis on identity politics. But of course, all of these critical theories really emphasize heavily on identity, taking away personality as individuals, and emphasizing what categories you fit into in regards to identity. And that, with the components of mental health, I personally have experienced a lot of mental health crises in my life. And when you're in that state of compromised mental health, you're really, really self-absorbed. It's necessary for survival. You just don't have the bandwidth to be considering others, because you're just struggling to survive within the torment that's happening within your own mind. And I think that what gender identity does is it takes children who already are in that place. We see that higher rates of the gender nonconformity and the social issues around gay kids, around autism. I personally have ADHD, who had trauma in their youth, and so you're already in a state of distress that might not be recognized, but you're already in this place of vulnerability. And then you're taught to invest heavily in identity, which causes you to double down on a hyper focus on your sense of self and a preoccupation with self. And it, I think, Stella O'Malley, Sasha Ayad might have pointed this out in a podcast, that they notice that the kids that come through they don't want resolution to their gender dysphoria. They fixate on their gender dysphoria. They want that distress. They are finding home in that distress, and to try to move them away from that is what makes them uncomfortable, as opposed to previous models where it would be that you want to relieve your anxiety. You want to move away from the anxiety or the depression that you're feeling. Whereas with this component of the hyper focus on identity and having connection to others through this place of identity, and a sense of self that may not be stable in that kid, starting to have a pseudo stability, but is actually really, really undermining and creates that hyper focus. And I think that's a big part of the kind of fomenting of narcissism within the people who fall prey to this.
Yeah, equity equalizes downward very much. And Helen Joyce, I paraphrase her because I can't remember exactly what she said, but she talks about how it encourages children to develop a matrix of emotional instability. And yeah, Stella O'Malley talks about that quite a bit, how uncomfortable once the child has invested an identity within a cross-sex identity, their sense of being special, their sense of self is all tied up in that. And trying to shift them out of that is what they are experiencing as distressful. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
so, when they have wrapped up their sense of okayness and feeling of well-being, again, it's a pseudo because they're very distressed within it, to that identity. As soon as you do anything to undermine that identity, then there's that struggle response, and they're naturally very resistant to it. I also just wanted to make another point again about how much advancement, how we have had so much advancement by these groups into institutions. And that's one of the components that's used is it's so much of it is around language, right? It's really coming from that, rhetoric, philosophical perspective of playing with words. And
yes.
when somebody comes in, like say a parent of a trans child in a committee, for example, who's like rah, rah, rah for their child, what's so interesting is that they use language that we're familiar with. And so we, start structuring this dialogue. Oh, we can all understand this. Like this is in reference to hate, that we can all understand it, but they actually have a different definition for those words than those words are commonly used. And I'll use the example of violence. All my life, violence has always meant like somebody smacking you in the head. It's a physical act. That's what it is in the criminal code. It's a physical act of violence. But by using that language of violence and getting access into violence, we're saying, of course, we don't want to have violence on the campus. We don't want to have violence in the workplace. And so substantiating that as gay people, we don't want violence against us in the workplace, for example. But then flipping that on its head and saying that words are violence, that if you express words, that shows that you have a different belief system than I do. Then you're actually committing a violent act against me. And, just that word alone, how it's come to be, such a powerful tool of what does hate mean? Well, hate is violence. I think we could all agree that violence isn't okay. But to misgender somebody being equated to violence underneath this framework is like a real backdoor entry into gaining a credibility when we weren't paying attention. And, the general public, average Joe, in response to this is like, oh, okay, well, that's not what I thought violence was. But it's like gradual and in the background, and it's subtly pushed. And so you're just falling into that by just not thinking very critically about it. And, oh, isn't this all about the good and being empathetic? And I think that it becomes, it's very, like infectious that way. It's cancer. I think we can all agree it's a cancer.
Well, how we discuss Fae in the context of this conversation can be interpreted by him as misgendering, misviolence, mispronouncing. Yeah, I'm acknowledging that some people are mentioning that they're going to need to leave by 8:30, which is just under 15 minutes now. Do we want to give the people who've got their hands up opportunities to talk, and then we'll wrap up the discussion? Thank you so much, Amanda. Sorry, Arty, Scottie, Jess is the order.
God, there's such a glorious terror of sheer intellect on display that I have like a million ideas that I want to react to, but I'll try my best to kind of grab at some of them, but there's just been so much. But something, it's just wow. Just absolutely wow, and thank you all. But to really go back to very early on, I think it was Melanie and Jessica. Another side note, if you don't put your name in the corner, I will forget your name. I think it's Jessica.
Yeah, it's Jessica.
We're talking about a little bit about sort of the kinds of things that reach people and the way that, it's a broader point that Melanie really centered on, that we all kind of hooked on a little bit about reaching people. The true believers are never going to be reached, but there are onlookers and this kind of sort of meta strategy kind of thinking. And I thought about that throughout this whole conversation. And Karin was talking about not just narcissism, but me-centrism. And there's a lot of me-centrism in a lot of this sort of narrative around the sort of mutation of gay rights. And I thought that was very powerful, particularly because it's not a very Canadian value, is it? To sort of me-centrism, to be me first and everything else. Again, this is one of these points I want to make. Like, this is marketable. You could argue this to somebody. I don't like narcissism. I don't like me-centrism. Why aren't we marketing this as fellow Canadians? Like, this is not a Canadian attribute. Like Eastern, Northern European, Nordic countries like Sweden, Norway, they have a very collectivist mentality when it comes to this kind of thing. They shun that kind of egocentric behavior, for better or for worse. In some ways, it can be problematic. In some ways, it's great. Canada's very much a country that eschews the idea of having a national ethos, other than our national ethos is just accepting everything all the time. But we should probably promote the idea that me-centrism is ugly. It's not very Canadian. So that's, I think, a very appealing, marketable attitude. And I don't think there's any negativity in pointing out that gay rights activism has turned into me-centrism, some of it. I don't think anyone should be nervous or scared to broach that topic. I think it's very fair game. I am gay, and people who aren't gay, I think it's very appealing and very reasonable to say gay rights is great, but let's tone down the me-centrism. And I think that some people might overthink that and say, oh, I'm not gay, I'm not allowed to say that. And I want to say, no, it's a very appealing, marketable point. Yeah. So I think just my whole watching everyone speaking with their nuclear force of incredibleness, that's basically rejuvenating my love of this country every second. Yeah, like, we should focus on narcissism being a collective value that we all hate. Me-centrism being something that nobody likes it. We don't have to tiptoe around the problems with gay activism. People are responding to this stuff, I can imagine. So these are just sort of thoughts I want to throw out there in terms of practical applications of everything that we're talking about. Don't be shy about addressing this stuff, because it hits the target. It speaks to people. And also, just one little thing for those of you in Ontario, if you want to go for coffee anytime, I am available, because I'm really excited to see and to be introduced to so many amazing people who are actually within coffee distance of me, and I'd like to know you more. Anyways, I'll stop because there's time limit. I know. Go on.
Kellie, you're muted.
Myself. I bounced. Scottie, you're up.
Oh, it's just been so wonderful to chat with everyone. Like, all the ideas flowing. There's so many things I would like to talk about further. I think we have a really good basis for an ongoing panel. To wrap up, Fae, he thinks we're hateful for not supporting life-saving care, and included in that is calling people incorrect sex pronouns. Like, how loving is that to children who are going through trauma and such? And I really appreciate Daniel Smith coming on the scene and taking the cast report seriously and talking about how now there will be a holistic approach for those youth that are between, what was it, 17 and 25. And it sounds like Fae is considering that as hateful as well. There's really nothing to say to Fae. They're off their rocker. Like, ideology, like how I feel about their ideology aside, the whole idea of getting that externus locus of control for us, for happiness. We're teaching kids that they need to have happiness from outside them all the time. And I just don't think that's a healthy way to raise a human being. Anyways, I'm going to stop talking now and go back to muting myself. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to go ahead and let Jess speak.
Thanks. Um, so a couple of things. Oh my goodness, you all have so many wonderful things to say. I love it. I love everybody's input. It's great to have so many different people with so many different wonderful ideas and thoughts. One of the things that we've been doing, you guys were talking about keeping people accountable, which I truly believe that like transparency and accountability is a big part of solution for all of this. And you know, it is important to put those complaints in and to hold people to account. We were able to in March hold 2 trustees accountable for the things that they had put online about parents that were quite bigoted remarks. Yeah, they might have only gotten a censor, but you know what? They were still found guilty. And that was the important thing, was to hold them to account. You know, and we've been helping other people from our area that have been having similar issues put in freedom of information requests, get the information out. That actually might not be a bad idea. Maybe we put in an FOI to the federal government for anything that was from the union heads or EGAL or PFLAG regarding the 1 million March for Children, and then hold them all accountable.
Yeah.
Right? Especially if we did it for all the union members and organizers who were within that meeting. They need to be held to account.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But yeah, and the positivity, like honestly, I'm ignoring Fae for her. Like, as far as I'm concerned, Fae is just, I think Fae's a person who is probably very hurt throughout their life, and this is their way of reacting to that hurt. And we have a gentleman in our area who's part of PFLAG who put out newspaper articles about how he was hurt as a child, and that's what he uses to sell PFLAG to the school board and to the cities around and towns in my area. But then when we go and we mention those things, apparently now we're doxing him if we say we're sorry that, you know, you went through those sort of things. Well, we've never been found to doxing because it wasn't really doxing. We were just quoting the newspaper article that he had a hand in writing.
Okay.
But again, it's that whole, you know, the oh poor me. I went through this, so everybody else must be going through this. Every other LGBTQ plus whatever person must be going through what I suffered from. Well, I'm sorry, but I as a teenager, I was the girl who was in the automotive shop. I took aircraft maintenance and avionics. I did a
Sweet.
lot of boy tendency sort of
Yeah.
things, right? I was
Yeah.
very much a tomboy. And but I didn't, just because Faye went through things like that and others did, doesn't mean we all did.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying there wasn't bullies, but everybody at some point has had a bully in their life. At some point, you
Mhm.
just need to, you can't protect from all bullies. And there, I don't know, they need to get over it to a certain degree. I'm not saying that anybody should purposely go out and hurt somebody or, try to put them down and whatever else, but it's not fair to, just, I don't know. I just feel like it's not fair of them to put that on everybody, that it's because they're hurt, that everybody is hurt.
Yeah. Karin, do you want to go ahead? Am I muted?
Yeah, just very quickly about on the topic of childhood wounds, that so many people do have them. I mean, I think Kellie has more of a claim to coming from that space than a lot of people do, but many of the trans activists do, and Barbara Finley is a really interesting example. She's been very public about the fact that when she was coming of age, and it was evident that she was a lesbian. She was placed, I think, by her parents into a psychiatric facility because that was a mental illness at the time. And it's clearly something that was traumatic for her. And my guess is that she still holds it against her parents, probably. But the fact that so many people have gone through various kinds of trauma and have these wounds, you still have a choice as to whether you now turn around and heal yourself by creating new wounds in the children of today, or whether you use your experience to help avoid children getting these wounds or incurring wounds. And so for Barbara Finley to turn around as somebody who had a traumatic coming of age as a lesbian and to say, okay, well, now trans kids deserve to have puberty blockers and surgery, and above all, because this is a really important element of the ideology, is to be alienated from their parents because their parents are evil and hate-filled. That to me is one doesn't even have to criticize the trauma, but that is an inappropriate response to the trauma. I think you're quite right, Jess.
Yeah, it was that was one of the most, like, the counselor I went to at the time, she did like a whole bunch of things wrong, like gay conversion therapy, wrong level, but the other thing she did was she told me for my mental health, I needed to detach from my family. I mean, my mom made all sorts of bad decisions, but one of the things she did right is she raised 6 kids who knew that, as messed up as the situation was, we never doubted that she loved us. And when I worked for Rain City Housing, I worked with a bunch of people who did not have that. They did not believe that their mother ever loved them. They did not believe that their father ever loved them. So this idea that any parent who is saying no to a child is somehow traumatizing that child is it's maleficent. It's, what's that wonderful M word? But it's an evil. Yeah. And
Malevolent.
yes, that one. Thank you, Karin. Amanda, go ahead, and then we'll need to wrap her up for the night. Thank you, everybody, so much. You're muted.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to respond quickly to that, what Jess was saying. I think we make a mistake, because we are empathetic people, we are automatic to relate to somebody, and why would a person be motivated to do this? And relate it to what would I be motivated? What would be my motivators? And of course, not all trans activists are narcissistic, but given a high tendency toward in both AGP and activism itself does attract a large level of narcissism, that we have to remember that the motivations are different. So while it can look like somebody is empathetic to the children that are coming behind them, and I had a hard time, and it would have been easier for me if I had transitioned when I was younger, and so I want to have that opportunity for younger children. For a narcissist, that's not remotely on their mind, because that requires empathy, and that's not what's happening. The motivator is a validation of their own identity, because they're completely preoccupied with their own identity. So while they're saying, oh, I want this for other kids so that they have this too, that's a front for what's actually going on. What's going on is that they want their own identity validated by having this society acknowledge that their belief system about themselves and their identity is valid. So the children are fodder. And that's why someone like Fae can look at the evidence of the task report and absolutely disregard it. The fact that trans activism currently is so harmful to trans people that it doesn't believe in evidence-based medicine is so harmful. And that motivator for a lot of those people like Fae that are pushing so heavily that we know they've read the science and they're just dismissing it, then it's a really good chance that their motivator isn't empathy at all. It's really about their own affirmation, their own validation. for their personal objectives, which is not in consideration for the harm that they would have on others. So, I mean, not diagnosing from afar, nor am I qualified to do so. Little caveat at the end.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. This has been like little hope in my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Did anyone have 30-second closing comments they're wanting to make? Go ahead, Arty.
10 seconds. Just thank you all. I'm terrified of all of you. But I adore you all. You just terrify the shit out of me because you're so bold and brilliant and amazing. It's very invigorating. This has been an invigorating conversation, to say the least.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all.
I'm a little bit scared too, Arty.
Well, I would love for Moms Against the Norm and Melanie to, like, some of these conversations I would just love to hear you having. So if anyone's wanting to connect with Emily, she does an amazing podcast series, and I would do whatever I could to facilitate that. So
Yeah, I have a Rumble page, Moms Against the Norm on Rumble, and I actually just yesterday or the day before, I think, published a very important video with Erin Kimberly, who is a trans person and used to work at the gender affirming care clinic in Kelowna, BC, where they were transitioning minors. And Erin really shared some important information in that video. So I really recommend everybody take a look at that on Rumble. But yeah, I just sent Amanda a private message and was like, email me.
Oh, yay. Awesome. Beautiful.
Thank you so much for this
Beautiful.
space. I'm in the same boat as Arty. I'm like, holy crap, the minds in this chat are like way too big for this
Yes.
planet right now. Holy doodle. I really appreciate you putting this together, Kellie. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like, for me, that, like, Stuart Parker has been such a encouragement to me, and just finding and connecting with other gender critical voices, right? And the idea we're not alone, you know,
Yeah.
and some of us aren't that far apart. So it's great. Yeah, thank you, everyone. So if anybody has anything, speak now or forever be ended.
Is it okay if I put this on my Rumble page?
Yeah, totally.
Is that okay with everybody else?
Share the link with us. I wanna revisit this if this is gonna go live. Yeah, share it with me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll maybe everybody
Scottie will link us up. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Let's get everybody, whoever has all our information, do the thing where you share it.
Okay. Yeah, it'll be on a Kellie and Scottie podcast also. So yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and hit end. Good night.